This is the year. This is the year that Penn State will dethrone Ohio State, and I'm not the only one that thinks this.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Oh yeah, this is going to be a fun show. You are locked on to Penn State football. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. The #1 Penn State sports podcast out there. My name is Zach Seyko, and I am your host of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Friendly reminder, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Be a part of the conversation. I hope you're a part of this conversation because this is the year that Penn State is built to beat the Buckeyes. They are built to beat the Buckeyes. Now, we're going to discuss plenty of Penn State, Ohio State headlines in this case. The Jim Knowles article by ESPN and the debate that Knowles' defense is too complicated. Penn State won't be able to adapt and adjust in a timely manner. We'll talk about that to wrap up the show. But how Penn State and how Ohio State contrast. What is the case for Penn State to finally get the best of Ohio State for the first time since 2016? So let's begin right there. Why is Penn State suited to beat Ohio State this season? Why are they better going into this season? Well, it certainly helps when you have a fourth-year veteran quarterback in Drew Allar. And I know that Ohio State fans are not going to agree with that right out of the gate. That's fine. That is totally fine. But it does help when you have a fourth-year veteran quarterback, a third-year starting quarterback. That does amount to something. And second year within Andy Kotelnicki's offense. But it's not just Drew Allar. He's not the only veteran that's returning to this offense. No, it's the superstar tandem at running back that's going to help him out. All three of these players should have been off to the NFL under normal circumstances, but here we are with NIL, with the transfer portal. They were able to return and make it worth their while, whether that's to improve their draft stock, make a little NIL money, win Penn State, or have Penn State contend for a national title. But in order to do that, you have to overcome the behemoth that is the Ohio State Buckeyes here. So Drew Allar returning at quarterback for his fourth consecutive season at Penn State. You get the superstar dynamic duo in Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen. But the difference is now that, okay, it's not just them. It's the supporting cast that Penn State has built around them in conjunction with what I'm going to talk about with Jim Knowles and Andy Kotelnicki too here. It's that Penn State's figured it out at wide receiver. Okay, so Drew Allar hasn't been as successful as you would have liked, as most college football spectators would like him to be, or at least expect him to be, is because, well, aside from Tyler Warren, Penn State really hasn't had a reliable weapon for Drew Allar to throw to. Now they've figured out wide receiver. They went into the transfer portal. They got Kyron Hudson from USC. Devontae Ross from Troy. Oh, well, that's a group of 5 wide receiver. Devontae Ross very well might be the leading wide receiver within this offense. And then they add a veteran in Trevor Pena from Syracuse. That is a solid trio of starting wide receivers. I don't think they're necessary. They're not comparable to what Ohio State has. I know what Ohio State has. I could rattle any of them off. Jeremiah Smith, most notably, but Brandon Inniss, or Miles Graham, who's stepping up. I mean, that's a phenomenal group that either Julian Sayin or Lincoln Keenholz has to work with. But Penn State took a major step forward at wide receiver, something they never had. And those two things complement one another. The wide receivers are going to help out the running backs be even better, be even more lethal in this case, because then you can't stack the box. And that's what Jim Knowles and Ohio State did a season ago, is that they dared Penn State to throw the football, or at least try to. They couldn't in those past 2 seasons, and that's why the running game was absolutely abysmal and had no answer. That was great coaching, and that was, well, for the lack of Penn State's options in the passing game. So now those two things can balance each other out. You have multiple weapons through the air to go along now with Singleton and Allen. And Penn State poached the best defensive coordinator in college football away from the team that we're talking about in Ohio State. So now Jim Knowles, who has helped Ohio State that defense be completely reinvented, reimagined to the best unit that won a college football national title a season ago, is now on Penn State's sideline, is now calling defensive plays and making those great game plans that I talked about against the Buckeyes, against his former team. Penn State also has the top offensive line, or one of them. I think, conservatively speaking, Penn State's offensive line is going to be top 3 in the country, with the case that they might be the best offensive line in the country, from returning 4 out of the 5 offensive starters from left tackle, left guard, center, and right tackle. Anthony Donko is going to come back. He was starting at right tackle a season ago, and then Nolan Rucci filled in more than just admirably for Penn State during its postseason run. And Penn State's offensive line peaked in that postseason run. They got better. They were middle of the road. They were okay for most of the season. When they faced Ohio State, they did an okay job against that defensive line. Nothing great to write about, but they did okay. But then in the postseason, that's where they started to click. And now 80% of that group, and then some, complementary parts, backups, top offensive line in terms of its starters, top offensive line depth too. So even if there are some bumps and bruises that the offensive line's got to deal with, Penn State's that front 5 is going to give Drew Allar enough time to sit back in the pocket for the receivers to run their routes and get open, and the running backs to open up lanes for them. So it's not just as easy as it was. You stack the box, you take away Singleton and Allen, and you really limit Penn State's offense. It's not that easy anymore. And what worked the seasons before with Jim Knowles at the helm, with how one-dimensional Penn State's offense was, that's not the case this time around. And I want to talk about the Buckeyes in just a moment in this upcoming segment about what they're dealing with, the changes that they're dealing with from this national title team that won a season ago. But I'm not the only one that thinks that Penn State can do this, will do this. Joel Klatt, Fox Sports color commentator alongside Gus Johnson, has Penn State #1 overall in the country. 24/7 put out a post-spring rankings and said that Penn State was above Ohio State as well. Now you look at some other ones, Ohio State's still getting due respect. And I'm not trying to say that Ohio State isn't going to be a top team in the country, that they aren't going to contend for a national title in their own right. But I'm saying that the gap is closed, and Penn State has actually pushed past Ohio State. Thin margin of error, but the Nittany Lions are, in fact, ahead of Ohio State right now as we speak, out of leaving spring camp and going into the summer. Again, things could change. Injuries happen. But right now, on paper, I know the game's played on the football field. I get that. But Penn State is in a much better position than they were comparatively to seasons past, where they're ready to take down the Buckeyes and be the top team in the Big Ten and one of the best in the entire country. Now, here are my thoughts on Ohio State, because the Buckeyes, they're a national title contending team too, but why I think Penn State is better suited to take them down this year is because Ohio State's defense will need to be completely rebuilt. We'll talk about it more on the other side of this break. And this episode is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts who are ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, whether that's IT, AI, web development, marketing, you name it. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple, makes it affordable. You're going to be able to find the right talent. If you need help with a marketing campaign, for example, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivers on incredible results. And you'll get fast and easy hiring with Upwork. Posting a job for free, but you can post your job for free, and it's simple. And within a day, multiple qualified candidates will be available to choose from. And you'll have cost-effective growth. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps you find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That is UPWORK.com, Upwork.com, to connect with top talent and grow your business today. And still to come in the show, we got an update on the Jim Knowles saga. That ESPN article was released. And I also want to respond to people who say that Jim Knowles' defense is too complicated, and good luck to Penn State for even trying to figure it out in year one. Do I think there's going to be some adjustments, some growing pains? Absolutely, but not to the extent that maybe some people assume. Let's talk about Ohio State, because this defense is going to be rebuilt. Not necessarily from the ground up, but maybe I should say that. Maybe I should, because the entire defensive line, and I mean the entire defensive line, not just the starters, but even key rotational guys are gone. Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, that Tyleik Williams, the bulk, the core of why Ohio State was able to make it as far as they did, and yes, win a national title, was because of that front four. It's an entirely new defensive line. I already pointed out that you lose Jim Knowles, you lose your defensive coordinator, the architect of this defense. And do Ohio State fans really just believe in Matt Patricia right now? Like, do you give him your full trust? Or is it a wait and see type of situation because of his recent tenure in the NFL? And he didn't make it there by accident. He was the DC for the Patriots for a while. He had success, but definitely doesn't have that recent success that will give you that overall confidence. I'm going to say anybody that likes this Ohio State team or roots for them is probably going to say it's a wait and see. You don't know until Matt Patricia has to prove you otherwise at this point. So it's kind of tentative confidence. It's that, yeah, we have, if you're Ohio State, yeah, we have Caleb Downs. We have a lot of former 4- and 5-star talent, but it's not Jim Knowles, who is the unquestioned top defensive coordinator in all of college football right now. And yes, Davison Igbenison is back as well. So the secondary has its players, but for the most part, the core of that defense is gone. And you have plenty of new starters. You don't have all those returning veterans that built a national title contending team, whereas Penn State does. So the script is flipped, where last year and the year before, look, I know what Michigan's going through, but you still have to point out what the roster had, and that was veteran talent and continuity. Michigan had that the year before going into 2023. Ohio State certainly had that in 2024, and now Penn State has that as well in 2025. Ohio State's offense is going to be completely different. We're talking about how different but the defense overall needs to be rebuilt, because I'm not concerned about Ohio State's quarterback situation, whether it's Julian Sayin or Lincoln Keenholz. They're going to be good by proxy, because Ohio State, I mean, you and I could be quarterback for Ohio State when it's Jeremiah Smith that you're throwing to. Okay. I mean, Ohio State's wide receiver room is loaded, and the backups, those second string wide receivers could start in I would say Graham could probably start at Penn State, if I'm being honest. But in close games, who is going to have that clutch factor? Sayin doesn't have the experience of being in those big games. And I know, Zach's talking about Penn State in big games, but that's something that Ohio State's going to have to deal with. Penn State podcast host is talking about big games. That's rich, but can Julian Sayin handle that? Can Keenholz handle that? Ohio State's wide receivers are just that good to bail them out of a lot of situations there. And running back room, solid. You go and get a CJ Donaldson. Who's going to be the offensive line? I have questions about Ohio State's offensive line, because that's getting a complete makeover. I think one starter from a season ago is returning to the Buckeyes offensive line. So just when I get done saying that, hey, Ohio State's defense is going to look completely different, so is Ohio State's offense, but with respect, not as much. Okay, you have a new quarterback, you'll have new running backs, different offensive line, but the relatively same receiving core, right? That's okay to say. Ohio State also lost Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly went off to the NFL, but there was the continuity. So that's different. Matt Patricia is coming in from the outside and is going to change the defense, and make it in his image. Whereas you promote Brian Hartline, and you're going to get elements. You're not going to get the same play calling necessarily from Chip Kelly, but you're going to get a similar offense with what you're working with, and you have that continuity. You promote in-house. It makes sense. So there's not going to be all those unnecessary adjustments. This one's in Columbus. When I look at this game, I'm trying to make the case for Ohio State too, of why, going up against Penn State. I think the way that Ohio State's going to win a lot of games is trying to outscore everybody. And why not? You go and get Max Clare from the transfer portal. You add him in conjunction with the wide receiver room. Like I said, the quarterbacks just have to be good enough. They just have to be serviceable because you have so many options to move the football downfield. Ohio State's going to probably be one of the most fun teams to watch this year because I don't know that I necessarily trust that defense to win games week in and week out. Sure, they'll be good. They're going to get better as the season goes on. This isn't, but it's talking about it with respect to the competition that they're going to face. When you face a Penn State team, when you face some of the other better teams in the Big Ten Conference, how are those units going to do? This one is in Columbus, which certainly is a massive bonus, massive benefit to Ohio State. I was going to point out how Penn State was coming off of the bye week and then double checked. And Ohio State also has a bye week in there as well. So there's no advantage to one side or the other, but home field's going to matter. What's different again this time around is that Allar has been in that situation. Allar went through that his sophomore season. It was a baptism by fire, but he remembers that moment. He's in Ohio. He's born and raised in Ohio. Definitely probably grew up being an Ohio State fan. And as his time, before he was recruited by Penn State, probably thought about playing on Ohio State, just saying. But this one's personal for him. He went through that already. Is it a Jim Knowles revenge game? Going back to Columbus immediately there? I will say this for the Buckeyes, though, what they always have going for them here in this case, at least recently, history over the past decade. Franklin is what, 1-12? That's just embarrassing. So if you're going to side with history, Penn State doesn't get this done. And that's, sometimes that might just be enough of an argument here. But I think when you look at each individual season, Ohio State was, in fact, the better team. Whether that was in the moment, there was Urban Meyer and company had outcoached or whatever have you. It's now all of these things put together. Allar going into his fourth season. The running game is where it is. The offensive line has never been better for Penn State. You add in Jim Knowles. It's about Penn State taking a step forward. If I really want to simplify it down, instead of trying to break it out and break it down layer by layer, if I want to simplify it, it is simply Penn State takes a step forward and Ohio State takes a small of enough step backwards that can lead to a win in this case for Penn State. Now let's talk specifically about Jim Knowles. That article by ESPN, some people say that makes Knowles look like the bad guy. I don't think Ohio State gave the best defensive coordinator the due respect that he deserves and waited too long to offer him an extension. We'll discuss that and more coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, can't-miss moments, and whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and even live during the game. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And currently available over on FanDuel are lines for those NBA playoff games. For tonight, the New York Knicks are on the road against the Boston Celtics. They're 10.5-point underdogs, plus 440 on the money line. Celtics are minus 590. The total is set at 211. The Denver Nuggets are on the road against the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Nuggets are 11-point underdogs, plus 410 on the money line. The Thunder are minus 550. With the total set at 230.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com. And if you are new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up because how does $200 in bonus bets sound to bet on those NBA playoff games? Head over to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's finish up this show with an update on the Jim Knowles saga, why he left Ohio State for Penn State, and why Penn State won't need 3 years to adjust to Knowles' complicated defense. He left Ohio State simply because he didn't feel like he got the due respect. And that's what this boils down to. So ESPN released an article, and simply it was the fact that they offered him that contract extension after the fact that they won the national championship game. So if he gets an offer earlier in the season, leading up to the title game, if there were discussions, negotiations, that kind of thing, Knowles is probably still at Ohio State. So he feels like he didn't get the due respect, and he was probably going to end up at Oklahoma because his fiance lives in the state of Oklahoma. But it wasn't until Penn State and James Franklin got word that, hey, Knowles is exploring his options because Ohio State isn't giving him the contract extension that he wants. And whether you think, okay, Knowles is the bad guy here, Ohio State, didn't necessarily give him the due respect, whatever it was, there was a communication issue across the board. Somebody dropped the ball. Did Ohio State really want to keep him that badly? I say no, because they didn't do what was necessary because Knowles was saying, I was willing to resign. It's not like, here's the offer, and he said, nope, not good enough for me. We're going to table this for later or come back with something better. It wasn't like that at all. He admits that I probably would have stayed had this been taken care of a lot sooner. So I think the issue lies primarily with Ohio State, that whatever the tensions were, whether it was Jim Knowles and Ryan Day or Jim Knowles and Larry Johnson, whatever, I think the welcome had run its course, that there was at least enough alleged tension amongst the coaching staff that Ohio State was okay with letting Knowles, because then this wouldn't have happened. He wouldn't have walked away. You won a national title. It's not like this defense was struggling. They were the number one defense in the country. You don't just let him go unless there's another reason. And I think that's just it, is that it wasn't working out anymore. So I do think it's on Ohio State. I do think it's on Ryan Day, because they didn't make a push to try to keep the architect behind number one defense. And they believe, Ohio State believes that, hey, we can get by. We can do just as well with somebody else. Penn State believes differently. Jim Knowles and Jim Knowles thought that his best option was Penn State too, because he made a call at 5 a.m. to James Franklin to talk about the opening for Penn State's defensive coordinator. So that Penn State wanted Jim Knowles, and Jim Knowles wanted to be at Penn State and bring his defense over there. That's my interpretation of it. Again, Ohio State wouldn't have let him walk if they felt like they wanted to keep him. And I think they put an offer out there just to kind of save face at that point. But of course, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section too. The other part of this is that I want to address Knowles' defense. And I've kind of talked about it already, that, well, good luck Penn State, because by the time that Jim Knowles' defense really settles in, it's not going to be till year 3, or if you're lucky, year 4. And that's not true. It's not true. Jim Knowles' system defense, Penn State has actually been running a 4-2-5, has already been running elements of Jim Knowles' defense as it is. So are there some intricacies and little parts here and, communication and things like that? Are there going to be adjustments that need to be made? Absolutely. But when Knowles came in to Ohio State, this was a complete overhaul. Knowles had to reinvent Ohio State's defense. And that was the adjustment period. A group that was, barely top 50 before he took over. And then they took strides to, get into the 30s and then get into the teens and then ultimately become the best defense. So that was that overhaul. Whereas, Penn State has been a top 10 defense conservatively the past few seasons under Manny Diaz, under Tom Allen. Last season, I top 15, but in terms of total yardage, Penn State was 7th in the nation in total yards allowed defensively. Jim Knowles is inheriting a much better setup, is inheriting a much better situation than what it was at Ohio State. where it's not a total makeover, a total overhaul. The players that are still there are familiar with the 4-2-5 setup, and that's something that Penn State has been more. Have they been? It seems like they were almost that they were preparing for the addition of Jim Knowles. I've talked about this before. James Franklin has always had Jim Knowles as one of his top hypothetical candidates. It's all about timing. Timing is everything. So the reason Jim Knowles was never a realistic candidate for Penn State in the past was because, well, he was under contract at Ohio State. He wasn't just going to leave the Buckeyes for no reason, but now his deal was expiring. And Penn State finally got that opportunity. James Franklin has his big board of coaches, and that's not just offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators. The lists exist for Franklin when it comes to, because with college football ever changing, it has to be that way. Knowles was always at the top of his defensive coordinator list, and now he finally got his guy. Let me point out that Penn State and James Franklin have wanted Jim Knowles for a long time, that he's always been one of his top options at defensive coordinator. Okay, Manny Diaz, Tom Allen, timing's everything. And Knowles was available, but I'll tell you what, that's who James Franklin has always identified as somebody that he wants to lead Penn State's defense. And now Penn State has made a more than serious, they've made a commitment. They get Andy Kotelnicki, they get Manny Diaz, Tom Allen. But until recently, James Franklin hasn't been able to get his top choice for these coordinator spots. And now over the past couple of years, with the changes to the athletic department and the university president, this is where Penn State has now been able to compete at a high level and bring in somebody like Jim Knowles. I mean, it was a hefty investment. It was $3.1 million because they believe that he's the guy that is going to get the most out of this present defense. So that's where things stand. It's a 4-2-5. They've been running this defense for some time now, so they don't really need to change. They don't make these drastic changes. So Jim Knowles is coming in with a serious advantage, inheriting a top 10 defense, a defense that is already aligned with his system. You couldn't ask for a better setup if you were Knowles and for James Franklin and Penn State and what they want to do this season. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Appreciate each and every one of you for checking out this show. Friendly reminder, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. If you are new to the channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check out the portal, Locked On Show, devoted entirely to high school recruiting, and the transfer portal hosted by Brian Smith. Every single day, like I said, you get the latest news, the rumors, all the analysis around moves in the transfer portal and high school football recruiting, which is why it's called the portal. Thank you again, everybody. For more conversations around Penn State football, men's basketball, wrestling, you name it, keep it right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.